everybody, it's Max, and welcome back to another tips tutorial with Plan B Terraform. Because when Plan A goes out the window, you had better have a Plan B to go right. And in this mid-game tutorial, we're going to talk about getting water, getting stuff, and a mall to go with it along with all your trains. So let's get to it. It's a beautiful day in the city, you betcha. And here we are in New London, and of course we want to have a look at some mid-game tips so as to make your life a little bit easier, right? Because water and trees and all the cool things is what you're looking for as your city starts to grow bigger, bigger, and bigger. So let's switch over to have a look at the in-game mall that I have built for getting all the resources and supplies you need, even for the mid-game material stuff. Okay, so just like any other factory game, it's best to have a factory mall. And of course, with my airport starting position, the airport mall, the airport mall is great for the beginner's game. But once you get to level 5 and 7, so if we go back here to level 5, I think it is. Yeah, level 5 gives you Mark II depots. And really, once these come into play at level 5, that's when you really want to start focusing your builds into real builds. Don't get me wrong, the airport mall, which is in my first tutorial, it works perfectly fine for the start of the game. But it really has no scalability in terms of dealing with much larger numbers. And you're going to need thousands and thousands of certain buildings. The 3 buildings you need to focus on the most is extractors, factories, and Mark II depots. Yes, you're going to need a lot of these other buildings. Like, you'll need assembly plants. You're going to need like supply centers and waste disposal units. But you will need like thousands of extractors, and you're going to need tens of thousands of depots, and you're going to need thousands of factories. So for that kind of build, you're going to want a mall. Now, in this particular case, let's review the mall start to finish. As you can see here, the nice part about the mall is that it tends to be in an organized fashion of material. And where materials are shared, or like there's 2 materials for a specific thing, you'll start to see where the cross bleed is through. So like, you'll see steel and then concrete on either side, but these factories in here must be 2 items, which must be steel and concrete. So let's get started from the front. Just as a note, as you get on with the game, certain things you won't need anymore, and I pull them buildings away from the mall, but I still leave them above it just so as I can look at them for reference. So the very first thing I had in my mall was a Mark I depot. So there's a Mark I depot, right? All it requires is steel bars. And as you can see here, I put it back in. I can have more Mark I depots all I want. But once you get Mark II depots at level 5, that should be where your focus is. And Mark I's from here on out, they're just a waste of your time. Okay? Now, like I said, I did keep the building up here so as I can make reference to it. Next, I have 4 extractor buildings. Now, that's because, like I said, you are using thousands of extractors, and you're going to need a lot of these things. And right after that, I have at least 2 rail all the time. Now, the nice part about this build right here is if I find I'm running a little over on extractors but running a little short on rail, I can switch this building to be a rail building because of its position in the whole thing. So see, now that I've switched this to a rail building, it will now gather from these 2 platforms and now give me extra rail while still giving me lots of extractors. Okay, so after either 4 extractors or 3, either way you want to do it, then of course you actually need to have rail stops. Now again, rail comes along at level 7. Okay, so if we go back here, I think it's level 7. Yeah, so level 7 is when you actually get rail and trains. But, of course, we want to focus on level 5s to level 7, so your mid-game will run really good. But this is where you would set up your rail. Now, obviously, if you haven't gotten to level 7 yet, and you're working with level 5 now, right? So you're building this stuff, just leave blanks, right? Just leave it blank. Put it in, but leave it blank. And then when you do get the material, then you can just drop it in, right? So in this case, you'll see we have space here. This was for my road and road depots. Obviously, I don't use road anymore. Mid-game and beyond, road is just too slow, right? It just, road only has one purpose, and I'm going to show that to you here in a bit. So I've pulled the road buildings away. So as again, you don't want this stuff just sitting there building forever, right? Make sure, like, I mean, you know, I've got like over 2,500 road tiles that I'll never use again. So don't let it use extra concrete on that, because again, planet limited resources, right? You got to make sure you've got what you need. So that is the road and the road depot. Of course, if you need the road until you get rail, then obviously you're going to make road and road depots. But as soon as you've switched over to a full rail, then it's time to pull them buildings away. Then, of course, we have here the supply depots and the waste disposal center. Then we get into the recycle center, and this is where you're going to start seeing our first concrete / high tech. Now, there's a couple of buildings I believe in here that use high tech and concrete. And the thing is you can actually swap buildings, right? And this is going to be really evident here in our next section. So when I first start, I like to have 2 train buildings. Now, trains take mechanical parts and they take high-tech parts. So you can see here, we have like greenhouse gas generators. These are dam elements. They just need reinforced concrete. They had to be close enough here. But I can easily switch this to something else, right? I don't need it to be that. And in fact, like for example, these greenhouse gas generators, let's say I had enough of them at the moment. Well, I can switch them back to trains. And again, works really good here, okay? So you'll notice here, factories is another big thing I have pulled away. Now, again, you need a lot of factories, but once you've got, let me see, how many do I have at the moment? Yeah, I've got 2,000 spare at the moment. And again, resources are everything, so I've pulled some of my extra factories off the line, but I usually do have like an ice extractor, which again, I share with a resource, right? And then I can go ahead and I can have like 4 factories or 3 factories, whatever I need. This here, of course, is the assembly plant. The assembly plant was down here as well, but again, I haven't used assembly plants in quite some time. Once you've kind of got your mall set up and, you know, a few other things, you really don't use assembly plants anymore. It's all about the factories and how many more factories you can get. Then, of course, so I've pulled out my extra spare factories. I always have one running all the time because you're always putting down factories at some time. But I have pulled away my extra 2, but this is where they would have gone. Then, of course, I have up to 5 Depot Mark IIs. I have 3 running at the moment. That being said, sometimes I put 2 in the back, so of course they can draw on the same resource, right? And especially at the beginning of getting Mark II depots, I like to have up to 5 of them running all the time and just pump it out, right? Now remember, you get Mark II depots and you can start building this at Mark V. What you won't have is the trains. Trains won't come until Mark 7. So what you do is you just do this, but supply it by road. Now, I will draw the road out here, right? So I'll draw the road out here. But in this particular case, you know, these are being supplied by train at the moment, but there's nothing to say that I couldn't supply any of this by truck until I got trains. Okay, so you can supply this by truck as easily as you can by train. The only difference is volume. All right, so obviously you can plow hundreds of trucks onto a truck line and trains will just carry more. So with that, get started at level 5 building the mall, okay, using a road line and this kind of material. Again, at level 5 and level 7, you're not going to have access to some of the material, right? So like you're not going to have access to water until much later. Doesn't matter. Just put in placeholders for now, right? Call this iron if you want, okay? Same with carbon. You're not going to have carbon until later, right? Put in, I don't know, sulfur as a placeholder, right? That way you know it's marked, you've got it ready to go. So when you're ready with trees, you can make trees, right? Or greenhouses, okay? And of course, you can supply them with roads until level 7. And as soon as level 7 comes and you got rail, then put your rail down. You're good to go. Okay, with that, let's move on to a rail tip. Wow, some pretty, isn't it? You betcha. Let me tell you, this was a lot of work, people. This was a lot of work. And this, of course, talks about the loading and unloading of trains, what's the most efficient, and why is this the design I went with. So thanks to my live chat and some others that we were talking with, for the most input-output, it appears that 4 stations can fully unload a train as fast as possible and get it back out the door so the next train can come in. And what you're seeing here is you're seeing what I would call the left side of a map, okay? So it doesn't really matter if the left side is your supply side and the right side is your waste disposal side, or if it's in reverse, okay? But whichever way you're going to do it, be consistent, right? If this is going to be your supply side, then make sure it's all your supplies, right? Like, don't be mixing and matching the two sides. You'll get yourself totally confused, and you won't be able to do great design work like this, which of course is going to help us unload a whole lot. And I have a problem with high-tech parts, people. That's not good. Okay, here comes a high-tech train now, but we'll have to investigate that. So in this case, you can see here each of these has a 4 radius unload factory, and each of those has access, okay, to 2 touch points on the way back, and those 2 touch points work their way back towards the supply centers. Okay, so you'll see here I have food in a 4 touch point. I have reinforced concrete on a touch point. I have high-tech components, the 4 of them on a touch point, and I have oxygen, O2, on a touch point. And those are, by the way, the four entries you'll need for the full game supply center side, right? Now you'll notice here with those supply centers, basically you've got 4 zigzag lines of the material, right? So I have food, I have oxygen, I have high tech, I have reinforced concrete. And now it doesn't matter what the 4 order is, as long as it's consistent all the way up the board. And of course, when it comes to then attaching it to rail, then of course you want to be able to make sure you have the 4 touch points on these circles. Now, doing rail is actually pretty easy this way. There's nothing really to it. So of course this is a line here, and then you just draw yourself off a straight line like this and around, and there you go. Look at that. You got yourself a circle, and you're good to go. Now let's actually have a look at what I call the right side. So the right side, because of hexagons, the left side is shaped differently. So this is what I call a left side build. Now on the right side build, because of hexagons, this line can actually be straight, like so, right? Which we could not do that on the left, right? See, because of hexagons, you can't do that on this side. So it gives us a little bit of a different pattern. Now, when it comes to waste disposal, obviously mid-tier, you're going to first have metal waste, then organic waste. And what's not shown here is the other 2. One of them is plastic waste, and the 4th one, I can't remember, but you're going to have 4 of them to get rid of, right? Because we have 4 bays. So you're going to have the 4 coming in, you're going to have 4 coming out. And of course, just because the design is slightly different doesn't mean it isn't accomplishing the same thing. So as you can see here at the pickup and drop-off points, we've got 4 bays. Each of these bays has 2 touch points to get into the city stream of things, right? And so of course you'll be able to get rid of that material. Now in this particular case, you can see here we've got my metal waste, we've got my organic waste. Soon I'll have my plastic waste up and running and the other waste. And then of course I'll have trains picking them up. So of course that is the design pattern of rail. When it comes to being up against the city, be sure to be consistent. Of course, keep supplies on one side and your waste on another. And again, it doesn't matter what side that is, but be consistent on whatever side it is, right? So obviously here's a totally different side of things. I made this side here, the bottom half, going with my supply side, and up here, as you can see, this is going to be my waste side. And of course, once I actually have more waste down, this city is just growing now, right? So waste is just starting. And of course, what we would do here is we would go ahead and we would let's determine which one's going to be the pickup for this. And I guess I'm going with that one, I guess. And of course we do that, and then of course we're gonna feed that in here. That one's probably in the wrong position, but that's all right. I'll go stare at my other city here for a minute, and we'll get at least 2 of them in. 1, 2, I think is right about there. Take that out. There we go. That will handle it. And then, of course, you can we just repeat that pattern for the other circles, and we're ready to go. So with that, let's get in to one more tip. Now, I did make the case where you may have one instance where you will still use roads after the mid-game and the trains come along. And this is the example right here. So when you're doing larger factories, right? So let's say, you're doing this kind of factory, you're making mass steel, you're making mass aluminum. Of course, you're supplying that and picking up with trains, okay? So in this case, I have a food factory here, and of course, it's making all kinds of food. One of the things, though, about these larger factories is that the drones, though they work fine, Mark II drones will move things along. On the odd occasion, I don't know, the drones tend to get a little silly stuck. And so what you want to do is we can kind of help the drones out a little bit by using little shunter truck lines, okay? And this is the one time where you might still use a few roads kicking around after you switch to rail. So what this is this here is the train stop for food, okay? It, of course, is in the center of this factory build, right? And the trains pick up the food and they leave. But the food out here on the far ends of the factory, in trying to move all that food into the center of the factory to get picked up, sometimes it's either A, too slow, or B, sometimes it just seems to be a little quirky and doesn't work. So what the trucks do, in this case, is it can grab from these end pieces and then drive it up here to the center. And then, of course, these center pieces will pick it up and put it on the trains. So this is these little shunter lines may be an excuse for you to still use some roads after rail comes along. Now, with that, let's move on to the next tip. The water that you need for making food is not this water. This water doesn't matter, okay? You can this water out here is great to look at, but has nothing to do with that. This here is where the water comes from. It's from your poles. So of course you will get these drills, and I think I think they're back here. What was it? Level 11? Yes, ice extractors. Here we go. So this here is where you're going to get nitrogen and water, and of course that is what's going to provide all the food. And you'll have to deal with this before you can deal with a food factory. Now, in this particular case, these have to be placed on ice, and as you can see here, I like placing mine in groups of 8. That way we can keep moving stuff from the back to the front, and I don't need multiple train lines to keep doing that. That being said, anything much bigger than this, and this runs about 120 trains. After that, it doesn't work anymore. So, and this will not do an entire city up to 100,000. This will only do up to a city up to about 75,000. So I actually need to build more of these. So for 3 cities, I would build 5 of these, maybe 6. 2 of them, well, it all depends on how high you want your population to go. 2 of these, of course, will do a city of 150,000. Like I said, after about 100 trains or so, they just cannot keep up, right? The drills do tend to be a bit slow producing water, and of course, after about 100 trains, and that's at this size, okay? If yours is not as big as this, then it definitely won't supply 100 trains, all right? So you can get about 100 trains worth out of a size like this, and with this design, You know, like I said, you can get about 70,000 people, you know, 69, 70,000 people. Stretching it a little bit, but you'll definitely need more of these. And of course, that's when and of course, you can't build on water once the water arrives. So you'll notice here some of these drills actually aren't working. They'll actually stop working because they're on water, and that's when you got to decide if you're going to move factories or not, people. It is what it is. So that is the actual water of things. But to make these actual lakes of water, that, of course, comes from just warming up the planet. And warming up the planet, of course, is done with the greenhouse gas generators. Now, obviously, greenhouse gas generators come a lot easier, come a lot earlier in the game. And they're actually here at level 6. They require a little, where is it? Fluorine? Is that how it's pronounced? Where is it here? Fluorite. I call it now in my live stream circles, we call it fluoride. So as we say that all the children have to come here to brush their teeth and give me their fluoride for making greenhouse gases. But of course they do need a little fluorite, and of course they need a little sulfur. And then of course once you have that happening, you don't need a lot of these factories. You just need, you know, what is there, 12 factories here? It's actually, you know, quite good to actually do that. And you can tell a couple of times where I've run out of a material and not noticed it for a while, and then obviously see that it's not working anymore and wondering why my temperature isn't going up. Something you'll have to keep an eye on for a long time. But that's how you get this kind of water. Of course, trees don't come until later on. I believe it's level 14. Yeah, so level 14, of course, 30,000 population. Is when you finally get trees. You don't have to have a lot of trees. They'll grow on their own, but what you do got to do is plant them close to water. Of course, temperature does play a part in it. Pine trees, of course, can survive in lower temperatures, and of course, their grow temperature is a little better. The other trees, the temperature's got to be a little higher. They'll stagnate a lot, so chances are you're probably going with pine trees to start. And of course, when it comes to trees, it must be within the green zones, right? If you put trees out here in the gray zone, they'll just die, right? So this is why you don't see trees growing all the way down here, just because of just how the game mechanics are when it comes to the trees in your mid-game. So with that, let's move on to the next tip. Okay, so as my final mid-game tip, this is kind of a double combination type tip. In the bottom left-hand corner, you are going to see an altitude marker. So as you can see here, wherever my mouse travels, in the bottom left-hand corner, it is giving me the altitude. So before you even get to water, you can actually run your mouse over the map, and you can actually see what the altitude is on that particular point. Anything around the 150 or lower range is definitely going to be water, all right? So I'll just warn you now. And so you can see here, the altitude here is about 146 meters, and sure enough, it's a big lake, right? That's what's happening. It's water, all right? You can see over here, of course, this one here is 150 meters. It's water, all right? So you'll definitely want to make sure that when you're building, you kind of want to avoid the low-lying areas, because once they're covered with water, they're done, right? And you don't want to be getting messed around and all that stuff. The other thing, of course, is to use your map up here in the upper right corner, right? The map in the upper right corner, along with your altitude button, will definitely help out with the mid-game going into the late game. That way you avoid serious situations where you've accidentally built factories or whatever on top of entire lakes and then have to move them out. You'll notice here when I went to build this, one of the things I had done at the start of this map was I had scouted this plains here because I kind of knew I wanted, I knew my city was here, and I was looking for, a wide open area to have my mega factories on. And in this particular case, the altitude here, of course, was showing at about 300, 350, even looking at a little close to 400. And I knew my factories were going to be really safe up here. So this, of course, is where I built my factory line. As a little bit of a bonus tip, whether you're using road, which of course you'll have to at the start, or rail a little later on, in this particular case, it's best to have yourself a master road / rail line. Think of it as a bus in like Factorio or Satisfactory if you're into building a materials bus in those factory games, where you have a master line of things where the trains and the trucks can drive up and down, and then you build your factories off of that main bus. So in this case, my steel and aluminum builds are here. Of course, this is my high-tech and mid-range parts are over here. Of course, down here is my mall. Down here, of course, is food and all that wonderful stuff. And it allows you to use this main train bus or road bus to then interconnect all these things together. So when you then have to actually start importing material from outside the map, or you have to start connecting into other cities besides the one that's close to you, well, you've got everything on this main train bus or this main road bus, and you can actually just start pulling things along. With that, there's some mid-game tips for you. Of course, we're gonna be we're playing it on the channel, all the things. I'll have a couple of playlists there for everybody to review as well. We're having a great time. Come join us. I'm Max. These are some tips and mid-game tutorial stuff for Plan B Terraform, because when Plan A goes left, you better hope Plan B goes right. And I will see you on the next one. Take care.